Okay, let's dive right in. It's quite a puzzle, isn't it?
Hmm.
Well, think about Spain. A population often associated with, let's say, enjoying life, good food, maybe some wine, those midday siestas.
Right, a more relaxed pace, definitely.
Exactly. But then they also have some of the highest life expectancies and really remarkable disease resistance rates globally. How does that square?
It absolutely is a paradox. And, well, researchers are looking more and more at something they sometimes call, informally, the Spain gene.
The Spain gene.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
and this is really important, it's not literally one gene. We need to be super clear on that.
Okay, not a single gene. Got it.
No, it's more like a unique combination, a cluster, you might say, of genetic traits. And these traits are deeply rooted in the history of the Iberian Peninsula.
So history plays a big part here.
A huge part. And understanding this cluster is, well, it's starting to shift how we think about human health, immunity, even our ancient past.
That's a critical point, cluster, not gene. And that really sets up what we want to do in this deep dive, doesn't it?
We want to unpack these genetic secrets, look at what they mean for health, for immunity, how history shaped them, and even touch on some of the controversies that pop up around this.
Exactly. It's a fascinating intersection.
Think of this as maybe a shortcut for you, the listener, to really get a handle on this remarkable population and what makes them tick, genetically speaking.
So when scientists look at the genetics of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and Portugal today, one thing really stands out.
What's that?
Just the sheer genetic diversity. It's actually one of the most genetically diverse human populations in all of Europe.
Wow. Okay, and that's not just by chance, I assume?
Not at all. It's a direct result of its history, a real melting pot.
Right. You've got layers upon layers of history there.
Exactly. Think about it. You had the original Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, then waves of influence from North African Berbers, Phoenicians, Romans, Visigoths.
And later, Jewish communities, Moorish influence, Celtic connections.
Precisely. All these different groups contributing their genetic material over centuries.
So this rich mix means that Spanish genes carry what, like older immune adaptations?
That's what the evidence suggests, adaptations that you don't see as commonly, perhaps, in other parts of Western Europe. Ancient ways of fighting off disease preserved in the DNA.
Is there specific, genomic evidence for this?
Oh, definitely. There was a big study published in Nature back in 2019, really influential.
Okay.
It found that, get this, over 20% of the DNA in modern Spanish people shows ancient North African ancestry.
20%. That's substantial.
It really is. It's a clear genetic echo of the nearly 700 years the Moors were present in Iberia. A lasting legacy.
Okay, so we've established this incredible genetic melting pot. But what does it do? What are the actual tangible benefits of all this diversity when it comes to health?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Researchers have pinpointed some specific things. One striking feature is finding higher frequencies of certain HLA alleles.
HLA alleles. Remind us what those are.
Sure. They're basically key immune system genes. Think of them as helping your body tell the difference between your own cells and, say, a virus or bacteria, like security badges for your immune system.
Gotcha. Immune system ID badges.
Exactly. And in Spain, certain types, particularly ones called HLA-B27 and DRB107, are just much more common than in nearby countries.
And these specific genetic markers, these badges, they give people an edge.
That seems to be the case. Studies have linked these markers to things like better resistance against certain viral infections, like hepatitis, maybe even HIV.
Really? HIV too?
Some evidence points that way, yes. And also potentially lower severity for some autoimmune conditions.
Okay, that's significant.
And there's more. Some studies even suggest a link to longer telomeres.
Telomeres?
Yeah.
Those are the caps on our chromosomes, right? Linked to aging.
That's them, the protective ends. Longer telomeres are generally associated with slower biological aging, better cellular health.
Okay, now it's starting to connect.
Yeah.
Because Spain does have incredibly high life expectancy. What was the figure?
Yeah. According to the WHO for 2024, it's around 83.3 years. That's just slightly behind Japan, which is usually number one.
83.3. That's remarkable.
It is. And the hypothesis is that this genetic background might provide a sort of buffer, protection against inflammation, against oxidative stress.
Even with a diet that, while Mediterranean and healthy in many ways, can include plenty of, say, olive oil, fats, and wine.
Potentially, yes. It might help mitigate some of the potential downsides, contributing to that impressive longevity.
Which brings us neatly to this. well, this puzzle you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
the alcohol paradox.
Ah, yes. It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
So Spain's alcohol consumption per person is around 10.5 liters a year.
Roughly, yeah. Which is actually a bit above the European average.
Right. But here's the paradox. Their rates of diseases we often link with heavy drinking, like liver disease, heart disease, stroke. They're significantly lower than in other countries with similar or even lower consumption, like Germany or the UK.
Exactly. It seems counterintuitive. How can they drink that much, relatively speaking, and have better outcomes in those specific areas?
So what's the leading scientific theory on that? Is it back to the genes again? Are they processing alcohol differently?
That's precisely what some researchers are exploring. They're looking at specific genes involved in how our bodies metabolize alcohol, genes like ADH1B and ALDH2.
Yeah.
The idea is that certain versions or variants of these genes, which might be more common in Iberian populations, could allow people to break down alcohol more efficiently.
Meaning less toxic stuff building up.
Potentially, yes. Less accumulation of harmful byproducts like acetaldehyde. It suggests a possible genetically influenced way of handling alcohol more effectively.
But I can see a potential pitfall here. If you start talking about genetic tolerance to alcohol.
You're right. There's a definite counter-argument, and it's an important one.
Because it could sound like you're giving people a free pass, almost.
Exactly. Critics raise a flag, warning that focusing too much on this potential genetic advantage could create a false sense of, well, invincibility.
Downplaying the actual risks of drinking, especially for younger people.
Precisely. Suggesting there's some kind of cultural or genetic okay for higher consumption could mask the real dangers. It's a very delicate ethical line for researchers to walk.
A really crucial point to keep in mind. Okay, let's shift slightly. We've talked DNA, we've talked metabolism, but what about lifestyle? How do genes and environment interact here? Because you hear about Spain having characteristics of blue zones, right?
Absolutely, especially in places like the Balearic Islands or parts of Andalusia down south.
And blue zones, just to remind everyone, are these specific spots around the globe where people live exceptionally long, healthy lives into their 90s, 100s.
Correct. And in Spain, it doesn't seem to be just about the genes. It looks like a powerful mix.
A mix of what?
Well, factors like generally lower levels of chronic inflammation in the population, very strong family ties, and social connections, that family-centric culture.
That social fabric must play a role.
For sure. And also, simply the environment. Lots of sunshine, that Mediterranean climate. Sun exposure itself has been linked to potentially protective genetic expression.
Genetic expression, so not changing the genes, but how they behave.
Exactly. This is where epigenetics comes in, the study of how our environment and behaviors can switch genes on or off. And these gene-environment interactions in Spain, they're actually being studied in epigenetics labs across the world now. It's cutting-edge stuff.
So it's the genes plus the sunshine, the food, the community. It's a whole package.
It really seems to be a combination working together.
But there's always a but, isn't there? Some researchers push back against focusing too heavily on the Spain gene idea.
That's right. There's a concern that maybe it exaggerates the role of genetics.
So.
Well, they argues that by putting so much emphasis on the genes, we might be overlooking other really important factors, structural advantages, you could call them.
Like what?
Things like Spain's universal healthcare system, which provides a safety net, strong social cohesion in many communities, and just the lifestyle people spending more time outdoors, being more active, perhaps.
So attributing it all to genes might be too simplistic. It ignores these broader societal and environmental factors.
That's the counter-argument, that it's a much more complex interplay, and giving genetics all the credit might miss, well, maybe half the picture.
Okay. And this leads us into perhaps the most complex, maybe even uncomfortable part of this whole discussion.
The historical context.
Right. Is this genetic advantage we're talking about? Is it truly just natural selection, or is it at least partly an echo of Spain's colonial past?
It's a critical question, because historians rightly point out that Spain's genetic complexity, this melting pot we discussed, wasn't just formed by gentle mingling over millennia.
No. It was also shaped by centuries of, well, colonization, the slave trade, forced migrations, conflict.
Exactly. Events that brought diverse populations together, often under traumatic circumstances. So the genetic landscape today is a direct result of that entire complex and often brutal history.
Which raises some really difficult ethical questions, doesn't it?
Profound ones. If we celebrate the outcome, the resilience, the longevity, are we inadvertently celebrating something born from trauma?
Or are we perhaps sanitizing those difficult parts of history by focusing only on the positive genetic results, like whitewashing the colonial legacy?
That's the heart of the debate. It's very active within academic circles.
So what are the main sides of that debate?
Well, broadly, you have some geneticists and historians arguing that attributing all this positive health stuff just to the Spain gene risks ignoring or minimizing that difficult colonial past and its human cost.
Okay. And the other perspective?
Others might see it differently. They might view it as a powerful, if complex, example of how human populations evolve through diversity, how strength and resilience can emerge, even from challenging historical mixing. It shows evolution through diversity, in a sense.
So, no easy answers. The debate continues.
Very much so. It's not settled.
Okay, let's just quickly pull back and recap some of the hard numbers we touched on.
Good idea.
Spain's life expectancy really high at 83.3 years.
Yep, world leading.
That 2019 Nature study finding over 20% ancient North African ancestry in modern Spanish DNA.
A key piece of evidence for that historical mixing.
And the alcohol paradox.
Yeah.
Consumption around 10.5 liters per person per year, yet lower rates of liver disease compared to many other high-consumption countries.
But intriguing mismatch, yeah.
It's such a fascinating case study overall. So, wrapping up, what should we, the listeners, take away from this? How does looking at Spain, this intricate blend of history, genetics, environment, how might that challenge our own assumptions about health and longevity, maybe in other diverse places around the world?
That's a great closing thought. It really prompts us to think more deeply about the interplay. It's rarely just one thing, is it? Not just genes, not just lifestyle, not just history.
Right. It's the combination.
Exactly. And maybe looking at a complex mosaic like Spain encourages us to look at our own backgrounds, our own genetic and cultural heritage wherever we're from, with a new appreciation for that complexity. What makes us resilient? What's our unique mix?
A lot to think about there. Definitely challenges simple narratives.